Alright folks, welcome to another edition of Standard Spike. This week we're doing Modern, because I feel like Standard is a little stale. Even though I haven't even done a video on it in a while. I just don't like it that much. Mostly because I don't like Delver, but... Anyways, Modern is something I'm actually getting into and liking a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and delve into my blue-white deck that you see here before we play in a daily event. And I'm going to go over everything in depth, because this is actually the first time I've done it. Anywhere, in fact. So we'll get started with the lands first. As a true control deck, I feel like playing 4 Colonnades is actually correct. And not just like correct, but that's something I really want to do, because this acts as the least narrow win condition, being a land. Makes it pretty strong in this deck. There's really no downside to playing 4. Just all upside, basically. The downside being that you have a couple tap lands, but we're actually not that heavy on tap lands. We have just the dual lands from there. And there's no Seachrome Coast, if you'll notice, because we have a lot of conflicting lands that we want to play on turns 1 through 3. Colonnade is one. Fetch lands for dual lands is another one. And also getting islands into play is important because of shackles. So I felt like Seachrome Coast was the weak link out of those and could afford to be cut. And I replaced it with a couple more fetch lands, like an island, I think the 4th Colonnade. So we have our duels, we have 6 fetches. Mystic Gate is kind of a random throw in there. It's not really necessary, but it lets you cast Cryptic off of plains. It lets you cast these sideboard cards off of island. So it does have a purpose. Watery Grave is for our explosives and our lingering souls. Dismember 2. And then we have our utility lands, which are not very many. 2 Edge and 1 Academy Ruins is really light. I could probably go with 4, but I feel like the mana requirements are actually kind of tight. So we're doing 3 for now. Edge is because of Red-Green Tron and that matchup being poor. And also because Mutavault is just not very good without any equipment, which is what the old version was playing. But yeah, without equipment, Mutavault's not a big thing. Academy Ruins is a new one I've not played much of, but it's really good with explosives. Basically, it's I brought it over from Legacy because I liked it so much there, and it's been really good so far. You don't get back Shackles a whole lot because it doesn't die in game 1s very much, but that is something that it is capable of doing. So let's move on to the spells. For our removal package, we have a pretty good amount of cards here. We have these as our cheap removal, Path being the best one by far. If I could play 6 Paths, I would, just because it deals with anything, exiles anything. Like obviously getting a basic land is like a thing, but it's not really a big deal in Modern compared to like how it was in Standard. Just being able to kill anything at an instant speed for 1 mana and not worry about it coming back is the best thing you can do. Dismember is kind of the 5th path. Costing 4 life is not very good when you have 0 ways to gain life in the main deck, and you're also taking damage off your fetches and duels. So I'm not hugely fond of this, but it is that extra removal spell. And then Gutshot is a holdover from last season where I think Fairies and Malira were bigger. And then Affinity 2, it's good against Affinity. But those 2 decks really dropped off the map, so I'm not sure if Gutshot is actually that great anymore. Like, where it's good against Malira, it's not really good against Nyapod whatsoever, so I could see myself cutting that soon. Spell Snare is really strong. It's performing better than it was last season, and I could see myself going up to 4. The rest of the counter spells include 2 Remand, a Leak, and then 4 Cryptic. I've been playing mostly Remands for a while, but I wanted to try a split of those for a bit. Not too fond of Mana Leak in this format, or in general right now. Cryptic Command, though, we want to have all 4 because this is a control deck, and we want to go late game every time, and we want to have Cryptic Commands pretty much every time also. It seems kind of bad because it costs 4 mana, and, well, it does anything. So you can say that it doesn't really impact the board, but it does whatever you need it to. So can't really go wrong. And we're always going to get to 4 lands. We're going to get much later than that, so there's no downside. Like in some matchups, it's kind of slow. You might board 1 or 2 of them out, but generally you have something to do with it always. Unless they can counter it, then that's a little bad. But, you know, whatever. Force Snapcaster is a pretty big reason for this deck to be good. Flashing Back Path is huge. Spell Snare is something, you know. And then we have these other cards too. Cryptic Command, Remand. So yeah, Snapcaster is huge. Vidalcan Shackles is another one of our removal spells. Not just removal though, kind of a game ender. A lot of decks have a hard time beating it. It is really narrow though, so I could see myself like moving to the board or something if the format were to shift. But right now I'm okay with it. Like at the very least I could play 1, but I'm okay with 2 still. So yeah, that's been good. And then Explosives is the last removal spell. The least narrow of the bunch, but also the most expensive. But the fact that it can kill like Ascension or tokens just makes it really good. And then also with the Ruins, of course. Then we have Lingering Souls, which connects a win condition or a great blocker. It's great against Affinity, works against Delver, has flashback, so we can discard it. And it did replace Squadron Hawk because this way we don't have to play all 4. We do have to play black, which kind of sucks, but we have to play an off-color land anyway, so for explosives. So like this, it's practically free. Yeah, and you also get more bodies than Squadron Hawk, even if you cut Moorland Haunt. Or even with Moorland Haunt, that is. You have 8 bodies. This gives you 12 between the 3 of these. And you could even go down to 2. It still gives you 8 bodies. So then we have Vendilion Click, which acts as a really great win condition and disruption at the same time. Because that's flash and flying is just perfect. That's why I play this card over, I guess you could say, either of these cards. It just is way, way better in the main deck. And if you'll notice, we have mostly instants. Our only non-instants are this bunch right here. And I'd say that's just because they're very powerful. And explosives, while sometimes expensive, is also sometimes very cheap. So it's not as big of a deal. And then Shackles is just a really big game changer. So that's like the reason we play that. And the fact that Lingering Souls cost 3 where Squadron Hawk costs 2 kind of sucks. But it's really something that we can work around. In fact, I think I'm getting less fond of this card. And I might go down to 2 main deck. But I really don't know what I'm making room for yet. Like I could go up to 4 Vendilion Click because I really like that card. But the fact that it's legendary, you know, that's kind of an issue. I did play 4 last season though, so I don't know. We could change that. Lastly, Pulse of the Grid, which is the big standout card in the deck. You might say, why not Thirst for Knowledge? Because that's what everybody says. But Thirst for Knowledge is not strictly better than Pulse of the Grid. It was while it was in Standard, I think, because of like artifact lands and artifacts being heavily played at the time. But people don't realize Pulse of the Grid is actually a good card. Like it actually has an ability that is relevant, and I think it's worth playing instead of Thirst for Knowledge until you get up to like 8 artifacts or more. I'm just gonna keep playing Pulse of the Grid, and I really like it so far. I think that's the whole deck for the main deck, and then the sideboard. We have 2 Disenchants, which you can't really go wrong with. There's always something in Modern that you can hit with that. There's always Affinity. Could go on. Shackles sometimes. Ascension. Birthing Pod. Yeah, so you can't really go wrong. Dispel. It gets counter spells and burn spells. Seething Song. You can't really go wrong with 1 because like it's a really narrow card, so having more than 1 is kind of bad. But with 1 you can Snapcast it, and that's really perfect. Geist of St. Traft is another win condition that's just much faster and resilient. We don't want it main deck because it's a 3-mana sorcery. Like Lingering Souls is much more versatile. That's why we main deck that instead. But I'm not sure about this card because even in the matchup where we want it, like which is Red Green Tron, they have Pyroclasm, so it could actually just be something else. I'm not sure what yet. Grafdigger's Cage is for Niapod because I realized that matchup is actually horrible, and this is the best card I think we could have for it. It turns off Birthing Pod and Court of Calling, and we board out Lingering Souls anyway, so it just turns off our own Snapcasters. But it turns off their important cards, whereas it turns off just one of our cards that is still a 2/1. Or we could always cast it before we cast Cage as well. Kitchen Finks, Just an all-around great sideboard card. Could even fit in the main deck, but I think basically that's Lingering Souls slot right now because once again it's more versatile. Like where the matchups where Kitchen Finks shines, it's definitely better than Lingering Souls, but Lingering Souls is better in a wider variety of matchups, and also you can discard it to pulse the grid. But for Jund and blue-white-red aggro, or Delver, I guess, this card is one of the better ones. Python Needle, just kind of a catch-all. Gets Karn, Expedition Map, Birthing Pod, Kiki Chiki, Quizali Pride Mage. Just a random catch-all, basically. And then lastly, Wrath of God, mostly for Nyapod. Against Affinity, you can get Edge Champion, because that is one of the problem cards. But it's not really a great card against Affinity. Like, generally, I'd rather have Explosives, but sometimes Wrath of God is just better than Explosives in that matchup. Sometimes. So, that's the deck. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.